I never thought that learning how to throw an axe could lead to one of the most intense moments of my life, but there I was, standing in a dimly lit warehouse with a guy that first barely knew, trying not to look like a total idiot. It all started on a random Thursday night, the kind of evening where I figured I'd just tag along with some coworkers to this new urban axe throwing spot downtown. Honestly, I thought it was going to be a joke, a place full of bros trying to act tough, maybe a few bad beers, and definitely no actual connection or sparks flying. Boy, was I wrong. So there I was, feeling a little out of place, gripping an axe that was actually heavier than I expected, when this guy, Liam, steps up beside me. He's tall, easygoing, with this kind of relaxed confidence that makes you want to listen when he talks. He caught me fumbling with the axe and just smiled, like he was amused but not judging. "Here, let me show you," he said, his voice low but not intimidating. He demonstrated the motion like he'd done it 100 times, smooth and effortless. I was trying to imitate him, but my throws were more pitiful than impressive. What struck me first wasn't just how naturally he moved or how patient he was as he coached me through the steps. It was the way his eyes held mine for a beat longer than necessary, like he wasn't just teaching me how to throw an axe. He was making sure I felt okay, like I mattered in that little space between the targets and the walls. I caught myself smiling, which I didn't expect, especially since I'm usually pretty guarded in new situations. After a few tries, I got the hang of it enough to stick a couple of axes in the target, and Liam clapped, genuinely excited for me. Then, without much warning, he reached out and grabbed my hand, still holding the axe tightly, and didn't let go. His grip was firm but warm, and suddenly that little warehouse with the scent of sawdust and cold metal felt like the most electric place on earth. I don't know if it was the adrenaline, the unexpected closeness, or the way his fingers curled just right around mine, but my heart started beating faster. For a moment, the noise, the other people, and the whole reason I was there just faded away. It was just us, frozen in this odd, charged pause. And just when I was gathering the nerve to say something, anything, he held my gaze and whispered, "You're better than you think." Then he finally let go, but I could still feel the warmth where his hand had been. At that point, I realized this night was going to be a lot more than just a casual outing. I wanted to know everything about him, why he was here, and what this unexpected connection meant. But before I could even ask, the next round of throws was starting, and I had to pretend like my heart wasn't racing out of control. I managed to pull myself together and took my place back at the throwing line, trying to focus on the target instead of the way my fingers still tingled from where Liam had held my hand. The room suddenly felt a lot smaller, more intimate, even with the background noise of people cheering and axes thunking into the wooden boards. I glanced over at him, and he gave me that small, encouraging nod like he knew exactly what was going on in my head and was on my side no matter what. We took turns throwing a few more axes, and I was surprised how fast I improved. Liam's coaching was low-key but effective. He'd toss a quick tip or a little grin whenever I managed to land one near the bullseye. At some point, the group started playing their little competitive games, pairing off for rounds where the loser had to do some kind of silly dare or buy a round of drinks. Liam and I ended up teamed together, which, to be honest, felt like both the best and most terrifying thing that could happen. Between throws, we found ourselves chatting. Turns out, Liam works in graphic design and has a weird obsession with old-school vinyl records. He's got this easy laugh that made me feel like we'd been friends for years instead of having just met 20 minutes ago. I was telling him about how I accidentally signed up for this axe-throwing thing without knowing what it even involved, and he laughed so hard I thought he might choke on his drink. "I mean, I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice softer now, like he was sharing a secret. "You're fun to watch, mostly because you look like you're about to drop the axe on your foot every time." I rolled my eyes but smiled. Well, if I'm gonna fail at something, might as well be something cool like this. That's when I noticed it, the way the light hit his face, casting shadows that made his eyes look even more intense. I was suddenly hyper-aware of the space between us, how close we were and how none of it felt awkward. It felt easy, and that was rare for me. The night stretched on, and we found excuses to stick near each other. At one point, Liam leaned in and casually asked if I wanted to grab a bite after the place closed. I almost said yes before I realized I was already hoping he'd ask. It felt like stepping off a ledge. A little scary, but exhilarating. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a wake-up call. We walked to a nearby 24-hour diner that smelled like fresh coffee and frying bacon. The place was almost empty, except for a couple of late-shift workers and a jukebox playing some old rock ballad. We slid into a booth and ordered way too much food, laughing over silly stories from work and life. Somewhere between the second plate of fries and a shared slice of pie, Liam reached across the table and brushed a stray hair off my forehead. It was such a small gesture, but it knocked the wind out of me. I caught his eyes, which were searching mine for a reaction, and I think I stopped breathing for a second. "You're really something, you know that?" he said quietly. I wanted to tell him so many things. That I wasn't usually this open. That I'd been nervous about tonight. That I'd never felt this kind of pull with someone so fast. Instead, I just nodded and smiled, feeling like words might ruin whatever was happening. When we finally walked back to my car, it was like the night had rewound everything to that first moment in the warehouse. Liam reached out and took my hand again, but this time it was different, more deliberate, more sure. And unlike before, I didn't want him to let go. Before we said goodnight, he looked at me and said, "I'm really glad I showed you how to throw an axe." I laughed, shaking my head. "Yeah, me too." As he walked away, I realized I wasn't just thinking about axes or targets anymore. I was thinking about him, about what this could be, and how maybe, just maybe, this unexpected night was exactly what I needed. The next morning, I woke up with that weird mix of excitement and anxiety that comes from not knowing where something new might lead. I kept replaying the night before, the way Liam's hand felt in mine, the way his laugh echoed in my head, that casual confidence that somehow made me feel like I wasn't just another guy at an axe-throwing joint. I debated whether to text him first. I'm usually the guy who waits it out, plays it cool, but something about this felt different. So with a racing heart, I typed out a simple message. "Hey, thanks again for showing me how not to embarrass myself with an axe." Almost instantly, his reply popped up. "Anytime. You're better than you think. Coffee this weekend?" That smile that had been so present in person practically lit up my phone screen. I said yes, and we set a time for Saturday afternoon. Just like that, what felt like a random night out turned into something with real promise. Saturday rolled around, and I found myself nervously choosing what to wear, trying to strike that perfect balance between casual and I'm interested, but not desperate. The cafe Liam picked was this tiny, tucked-away spot with exposed brick walls and the smell of fresh pastries. When I walked in, he was already there, waving me over with that same easy grin. We ordered lattes and sat close enough to hear each other over the soft indie playlist in the background. Conversation flowed effortlessly. He told me about his design projects. I shared stories about my job and how much I secretly liked annoying my coworkers. We talked about music, movies, and somehow ended up debating the best pizza toppings, which I'm fairly sure was just an excuse to see him smile. It was comfortable, like slipping into a warm sweater on a cold day. And I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just being me, and Liam seemed to like it. After a while, his hand found mine on the table, fingers intertwining naturally like they belonged there. My stomach did that flip again, but this time it felt steadier, more certain. He looked at me, eyes soft and a little vulnerable, and said, "I'm really glad you came out that night. I don't do this kind of thing much, but with you, it felt right." I squeezed his hand, feeling the same way but 1,000 times more scared to say it out loud. Instead, I just said, "Me too." We stayed late, the cafe getting quieter around us, until it was just the two of us and the hum of the espresso machine. At some point, Liam leaned over and rested his head on my shoulder. I didn't move. I didn't have to. It felt like a promise, a quiet beginning to something neither of us fully knew yet, but were both ready to explore. Over the next few weeks, we slipped into an easy rhythm. Texts filled with bad jokes, late-night calls where we talked until one of us fell asleep, and weekends spent discovering new places together. Every time we met, I found myself falling a little more for the guy who taught me how to throw an axe, but ended up catching me in a way I never expected. One evening, We decided to go back to that warehouse for another round of axe throwing. It felt symbolic, like coming full circle. This time, I wasn't nervous or awkward. Liam stood next to me, his hand brushing mine, and I realized how far we'd come from that first accidental touch. I threw my axe, and it landed smack in the center of the target. Liam's eyes lit up, and he pulled me into a quick, unexpected kiss right there. Loud, clumsy, and perfect. The world around us faded away again, but this time it was different. It was ours. As we pulled apart, he grinned and said, "Guess you really are better than you think." And honestly, I couldn't agree more. That kiss hit me like a lightning bolt. Unexpected, electric, and completely disarming. I mean, sure, I'd felt this pull toward Liam for weeks, but standing there in that echoey warehouse, with the smell of wood and metal all around us, it suddenly became real in a way I hadn't fully allowed myself to admit before. We pulled apart just enough to catch our breath, and I swear for a second, all I wanted to do was run my fingers through his hair and kiss him again. Instead, I just smiled, a little breathless, and wiped my hand on my jeans like a total dork. "Guess I'm going to have to up my game," I joked, trying to sound casual. "Can't have you thinking I'm just lucky with that throw." Liam laughed, this full, easy sound that made me feel like I'd hit the jackpot. "You're definitely better than lucky." We went back to throwing axes, but the tension between us was different now, thicker, more charged. Every time our hands bumped or our eyes met, it felt like something unspoken was hanging in the air. And honestly, I kind of loved it. After a while, Liam leaned in close and muttered, "You know, I was thinking, maybe after this we grab some pizza? Somewhere a little quieter than a warehouse full of flying axes." I nodded, feeling a little shy but more excited than I'd been in ages. "Yeah, I'd like that." We locked up the place, then walked down the street together, the city lights blurring into warm halos around us. Liam kept his hand just barely touching mine, like he was testing the waters but didn't want to pull away. I didn't pull back. At the pizzeria, we snagged a booth in the corner, away from the few other patrons. The conversation turned softer, more personal. Liam shared stories about growing up in a small town and how moving to the city was both terrifying and exhilarating. I told him about some of my own struggles, stuff I usually kept buried beneath jokes and casual conversation. He listened like it mattered, and when I finished, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for trusting me with that." It struck me then how rare it was to find someone who genuinely wanted to know the real you, without all the masks. Liam didn't just want the easy, surface-level version. He wanted the messy, complicated parts too, and that made me want to open up even more. The night stretched on as we shared that pizza and stories, neither of us really wanting it to end. When we finally stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around us again, but this time it felt less like a shock and more like a welcome. Liam stopped and looked at me, his expression serious but tender. "I want to see where this goes. If you're up for it." My heart hammered in my chest. This was the moment when the fun, easy stuff turns into something real. And despite all the fears and doubts, I found myself nodding. "Yeah, I'm up for it." He smiled, the kind of smile that made everything feel possible. Then, without breaking eye contact, he stepped closer and kissed me again. Softer this time, full of promise. Walking home later, I kept replaying that kiss, that night, and everything that had led me here. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out with someone by my side. Who knew that an axe-throwing night, a shared touch, and a little bit of courage could turn into something this real? After that night, things between Liam and me started to settle into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar at the same time. We weren't rushing, no grand declarations or dramatic leaps, but something steady was building, like the kind of foundation you don't notice until you realize you're standing on solid ground. One Friday evening, a week or so later, he invited me over to his apartment. I remember feeling that familiar mix of nerves and excitement as I approached the building, a little brick place in a neighborhood I didn't know well, with vines creeping up the walls and the distant hum of city life. I was trying to play it cool, but inside, my heart was doing that same flip it had done the first time he held my hand. When Liam opened the door, he greeted me with that easy smile that made me feel like I just walked into the right place. His apartment was cozy, filled with soft lighting and framed posters of bands I recognized, but hadn't expected him to like. We kicked off our shoes and settled onto the couch, where he had a playlist queued up, mostly mellow stuff with a few upbeat tracks thrown in. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing. Work gripes, family stories, favorite movies, embarrassing moments. It was the kind of conversation that stretches out and makes you forget the clock exists. At some point, Liam scooted closer, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling entirely at ease. It was strange how natural it felt to be this close, like I'd known him much longer than just a few weeks. Later, he looked down at me, eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "You know," he said quietly, "I wasn't sure about putting myself out there again, but you've made it easy." I smiled, my cheeks warming. I feel the same way. It wasn't long before things started to feel more serious, not because we said it outright, but because of the way we made space for each other. The small moments, like sharing a late-night coffee after a rough day, or Liam texting me a random song he thought I'd like. One Saturday, we decided to take a day trip to a nearby park. We packed sandwiches and a couple of beers, figuring we'd just hang out, maybe do some hiking. The air was crisp and smelled like pine, and the sun filtered through the trees in golden shafts. I remember watching Liam as he laughed at some dumb joke I made, hair tousled by the breeze, eyes sparkling. I felt like I was lucky to be right there with him. At the top of a little hill, we sat on a fallen log, eating sandwiches and just breathing. Then, out of nowhere, Liam reached over and took my hand in his. No hesitation this time, just a quiet certainty. I laced my fingers through his, and we sat like that for a while, saying nothing, but communicating 1,000 things just by being close. When we got back to the city, we stopped by a small ice cream shop. Liam got mint chip, I went with classic chocolate, and we stole bites of each other's cones while people watching from the bench outside. That kind of sweet, silly closeness felt like a world away from the awkward first night at the axe-throwing place. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself worrying if I was moving too fast or if Liam might be feeling the same doubts I did. I kept that uneasy feeling to myself, pretending everything was fine. A few days later, it bubbled up and I finally blurted it out over text. "Hey, can we talk? I've been feeling kind of overwhelmed." I wasn't expecting much, honestly. Maybe a quick reassurance and then back to normal. But Liam surprised me. He called me a few minutes later, voice calm and patient. "I'm glad you told me. I feel that way sometimes too. Let's figure this out together." We ended up talking for almost an hour, sharing fears and insecurities we hadn't dared say out loud before. It was raw and honest, and even though it was uncomfortable, it brought us closer. Liam said something that stuck with me. "It's okay to be scared, but I want to be the guy you lean on." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt this deep sense of relief, like I wasn't alone in navigating the messy, unpredictable stuff. And with Liam, I was ready to take those risks. A few weeks after that, we went back to the axe-throwing place, our unofficial spot. And as I watched Liam throw with that same casual grace, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. The stranger who showed me how to throw an axe had become the person I wanted to keep close, the guy whose hand I wanted to hold through all the highs and lows. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see where this went next. That night at the axe-throwing place felt like a checkpoint in some ongoing story we were writing together. Like we'd moved past the awkward getting-to-know-you phase, and we're settling into something real, something worth holding on to. I watched Liam winding up for his throw, muscles relaxed, eyes focused, and something about the way the axe spun through the air just caught my breath. It wasn't just skill, it was confidence, and I wanted to match that feeling, both on and off the throwing line. After his throw landed dead center again, he turned to me with that grin that always managed to make my chest feel tight. "Your turn," he said, tossing me a fresh axe. I took it, feeling the weight in my hand, and tried to steady my breath. But as I lifted the axe, I caught Liam's gaze for a moment longer than usual. It was like he was silently cheering me on, and suddenly I wasn't worried about missing the target. I just wanted to impress him in the simplest way. The axe flew, and it wasn't perfect, but it stuck in the board close enough. Liam clapped, and I couldn't stop smiling. See? You're a natural. We lingered in the warehouse for a little while after closing time, just the two of us among the dim glow of the empty lanes and the lingering scent of wood chips. Liam pulled his jacket tighter around him and looked over at me. Hey, I've been thinking maybe next weekend we check out that hiking trail you mentioned. You know the one with the waterfall? I nodded. Yeah, I'd love that. There was this quiet pause and then he shifted a bit closer. I want it to be more than just hanging out. Hearing those words out loud made my heart race. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. Me too. He smiled, this soft, genuine thing that made me feel like everything was going to be okay, no matter how scary it felt sometimes. The next week went by in this weird blur of excitement and nerves. I found myself counting down the days, wondering what the hike would bring, or if I was just making things up in my head. When Saturday finally came, Liam picked me up early, and we drove out of the city together. Windows down, music playing loud enough to sing along to, but not so loud we couldn't talk. The trail was everything I had hoped for, lush, quiet, and just a little wild. As we hiked, Liam kept stealing glances at me, like he was trying to memorize every detail. At the waterfall, we sat on the rocks, the mist cooling our faces, and I realized I wanted to remember this moment forever. Without really thinking, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers curled around mine like they were made to fit. He turned to me, eyes bright and serious. I feel like I'm falling for you, he said, voice low. I smiled, a bit breathless. I'm already there. That day felt like a turning point. We weren't just two people hanging out anymore. We were something more. Something fragile and new and terrifying and beautiful all at once. When we got back to the city, we stopped by a small bar that had live music. The dim lighting and cozy booths created this intimate vibe, and Liam leaned in close as the band played a slow song. Our conversation slowed too, words giving way to lingering touches and shy smiles. At one point, he brushed a stray hair from my forehead and said, I didn't expect this when I started showing you how to throw an axe. I laughed softly, feeling warmth spread through me. Neither did I. The night ended with us standing outside beneath the city lights, neither wanting to say goodbye. Liam hesitated, then reached for my face and kissed me. Slow, sure, full of everything we'd been building toward. When we finally pulled apart, he whispered, I want this to be the start of a lot more. I nodded, heart pounding. Me too. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a kind of beautiful normalcy. There were movie nights, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and bad cartoons, and spontaneous weekend adventures. But there were also the tougher moments, misunderstandings, moments of doubt, the occasional silence that felt heavier than it should. We didn't always get it right, but we kept trying, learning how to hold space for each other. One night, after a long day that left me feeling drained and a little defeated, Liam came over unannounced with takeout and his favorite record. We sat on the floor, eating and talking quietly, and I realized that this, him showing up when I needed it most, was what made me fall even harder. He looked at me and said, I'm here, no matter what. And in that simple promise, I found something I hadn't realized I'd been searching for all along: a partner, a teammate, a home. Sometimes when I think back to that first night, standing awkwardly with an axe in my hand, I'm amazed at how one small moment can change everything. How a simple touch, a shared laugh, and a little bit of bravery led me here, to this, to us. Life with Liam settled into this warm, unpredictable kind of happiness. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was ours. I found myself looking forward to the little things. His laugh echoing down the hallway, the way he'd steal bites of my food when he thought I wasn't looking, how he always knew when I needed a break, even before I said a word. One Sunday afternoon, a few months in, we decided to revisit the city park where we'd first really let ourselves get close. The light was softer now, late afternoon golden, and the air had that fresh, earthy smell you only get when leaves start to change. We found a spot on the grass, sprawled out side by side, and just let the world slow down around us. Liam reached over and took my hand, thumb gently tracing circles on my skin. You ever think about the future? He asked, voice low. I turned to look at him, watching that rare flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. All the time, I admitted. But honestly, I'm still figuring out what that even means. He smiled, leaning his head on my shoulder. Me too. But I like thinking about it with you. That felt like an invitation, a quiet promise that no matter how uncertain things were, we'd face it together. A few days later, work threw me a curveball. A big project landed on my desk, demanding every ounce of focus and extra hours I could muster. I was stressed, exhausted, and, to be honest, pretty overwhelmed. Liam noticed right away. One evening, as I trudged through the door, dragging my briefcase behind me, I was ready to collapse. Instead, I found Liam waiting with 2 mugs of tea and this ridiculously cheesy grin. "Rescue mission," he declared. I couldn't help but laugh as he guided me to the couch, insisting I relax while he made dinner. It was one of those moments where I realized just how much he understood me, without me having to explain everything. Just being there was enough. After dinner, we curled up on the couch, and Liam surprised me by pulling out a battered old photo album. "Found this when I was cleaning," he said. "Thought you might like to see what I was like before all this axe throwing and adulting." We flipped through pages filled with awkward teenage pictures, random travel snapshots, and a handful of candid shots with his family and friends. There was something so sweet and disarming about seeing this side of him, the imperfect, real parts that made him who he was. As I traced a picture of him with a goofy grin and a wild mop of hair, I realized something. I wasn't just falling for the guy I'd met at the axe-throwing spot. I was falling for all of him, the past, the present, and whatever came next. That night, after Liam had fallen asleep beside me, I lay there thinking about how much life had changed in just a few months. From feeling like I was fumbling through everything, to now having someone who made me feel steady, safe, and seen. But the path wasn't always smooth. There were still moments when old fears crept in, the fear of being vulnerable, of getting hurt, or of not being enough. One evening, after a particularly hard day, I found myself shutting down, pulling away even though I didn't want to. Liam noticed immediately, and instead of pushing me, he gave me space. But later, when I was ready, he sat down beside me and said, "I'm here, no matter what." That simple statement broke through the walls I'd built. I turned to him, my voice barely steady. "Sometimes I'm scared. Scared this won't last." He smiled gently, brushing my hair back. "Me too. But that's part of it. And I want to face those fears with you." There was a comfort in that, a reassurance that made it easier to take the next step, to keep moving forward together despite the unknown. We started talking about what we wanted, not just from each other, but from life. Late nights spent dreaming aloud about trips, places to live, maybe even a future that included more than just us. One night, as we lay tangled in the sheets, Liam's hand found mine, and he whispered, "You make me want to be better, to try harder." I felt the weight of those words, the sincerity beneath them. "You've already changed my life," I told him, in ways I didn't expect, and I meant it. From that first accidental touch with an axe in my hand, to this, the quiet, steady love growing between us, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We weren't perfect, and the road ahead was uncertain. But with Liam's hand in mine, I felt ready to throw myself into whatever came next. Together. It wasn't some grand gesture or a perfectly scripted moment that made me realize how far Liam and I had come. It was one quiet evening, a few months after that conversation about fears and hopes, when we found ourselves back at the axe-throwing warehouse. The place was nearly empty, just the two of us and the soft hum of the overhead lights. I held the axe, feeling the familiar weight in my hand, but this time it wasn't about hitting the target perfectly. It was about the person standing beside me, the guy who'd shown me more than how to throw an axe. Liam smiled, that easy, genuine smile that had become my favorite sight, and said, "Ready?" I nodded, and as I threw, the axe landed exactly where I wanted it. But it wasn't the bullseye that made me grin. It was the look Liam gave me, full of pride and something I can only describe as love. We stayed there a little longer, talking about everything and nothing, hands occasionally finding each other's in that quiet, natural way that only comes with time. Later, as we walked back through the city streets, Liam stopped me under a street lamp, the glow casting soft shadows across his face. He reached for my hand and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it. I squeezed his hand, feeling the steady beat of everything we'd built together. Me too. That night, as I lay beside him, I thought about how unexpected it all was. The way a simple night out, a shared laugh, and the nervous grip of an axe had led me to this. Not just to love, but to trust, to vulnerability, and to a kind of happiness I hadn't dared hope for. Life wasn't perfect, and we still had our moments of uncertainty, but with Liam, I found something real, something worth holding on to. And sometimes, that's all you need.